So news emerged last night that new guidance from the Sentencing Council, an unelected Quango, has suggested that if you are an ethnic minority, a religious minority, a cultural minority, or if you're transgender, then you should be guaranteed something called a pre-sentence report. And then that pretty much goes in front of a judge and makes it much more likely that if you've committed a serious crime, you won't receive any jail time. Tom, do you want to explain what this is, and then we'll get some...
No, absolutely. I think you described it very well there. I mean, what this is a really kind of unfiltered form of sort of woke racialism as applied to the law. I mean, it couldn't have been more crude if it was drawn up by Ibram X. Kendi. The sad fact is that kind of Kendiism has been kind of percolating around the British establishment for many years, and this is an example of that. What's really fascinating is that if you look at what the Sentencing Council have said, the statement they've put out since there was a lot of backlash, understandable backlash about what is a very clear-cut case of two-tier justice, is that they've essentially admitted that the aim of this is to address disparities in the justice system. So because of the fact that ethnic minorities tend to get more prison sentences, this is a way of addressing that, which is a telling admission, certainly, but also I think reflects the Kendiist approach, which is always taken to any form of disparity now, which is on the one hand, if there is a disparity, it must be proof of racial discrimination.
Yeah.
And that secondly, the way to amend this disparity, the way to address it is a new form of discrimination, but with more positive anti-racist intent. I think the way in which Labour have been forced to very quickly distance themselves from that, the Justice Minister has had to make her displeasure with these new guidelines clear, even though that's not necessarily going to nix them. She's been forced to do so. But this has been the drift of how we've thought about these issues for a very long time. And it's one of those things.
I don't want to be included in that we.
And I think
British state has...
No, exactly. Yeah. And because I think there is a tendency actually to act as if we've just imported all these things kind of post-2020. This is a kind of post-BLM response. These sorts of approaches have been taken for a very long time. You see it in the Lamy review of racial disparities in the justice system a few years ago. And take something like sentencing, it's quite clear that a large part of the disparity, for instance, is the fact that ethnic minorities tend to plead not guilty at a higher rate than white Brits, for example, seemingly based in a distrust of the advice that they're getting from kind of state-appointed lawyers and so on. So rather than trying to address that particular thing, what you try and do is put your thumb on the scale at the other end of the process in order to superficially make things look better. But obviously the consequence of that is the corrosion of equality before the law and a really ugly row now about whether or not different ethnic minorities are going to get differential treatment as a consequence of these guidelines. So it's as I say, it's kind of this new racialism in its most crude form, but has been a long time coming. It's not just a kind of post-2020, post-BLM sort of response.
Well, wokeism has thrown out equality before the law a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So, and the UK has embraced that inequality before the law with both arms. This whole business of hate speech and having protected characteristics mean different laws apply to you.
Yeah.
And it's an utter anathema to conventional common law. And I'm afraid a lot of this, of course, comes from the United States. I mean, in terms of the obsession with disparate impact, that's all over. That Biden administration was big on that. And that has spread. I mean, Canada has brought in different two-tier sentencing for different races. And I think the worst of it is in California. Surprise!
So sensible about everything.
Where they actually changed the law so that if you were from a minority and had been already sentenced, you could retroactively argue in court that you had been victimized by not just racism, specific racism in your case that you would have to prove, but systemic racism, which is like blaming the Easter Bunny or something. So and therefore you could get your sentence commuted or wiped out because of this terrible persecution. This way lies madness.
And absolutely. I think it was only quite recently where the Home Office there was a leaked report saying that it was far right to suggest that there might be a two-tier policing system or two-tier justice system.
They're now having to pretend that they were always against it in the first place. So they've pivoted very clearly from it's a far-right myth to this is terrible and we do not stand for it whatsoever. But they don't actually have, unless they want to change the law, they don't have much power to stop this. And that's also kind of their own doing as far as the Sentencing Council is very much a legacy of New Labour. It was set up in the sort of dying days of the Brown years, if I remember correctly. One of these various supposedly independent, which basically means unaccountable bodies, which have significant power and influence, but are not directly accountable to politicians, let alone to the public. And so if they do want to make this problem go away, they're going to have to pick a fight with the whole kind of quangocratic state, really, which is largely their own creation, which probably makes it unlikely they are going to be willing to pick that fight.